Hey, we are back at the third Retax Retreat. Thank you to our gracious hosts, retention.com, once again. And thank you as well, Jack Gray, for joining us. Jack is the president at parksproject.us and has a super cool background and a really amazing company that we're excited to hear a lot more about today. But Jack, thank you so much for taking some time out. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
So, Jack, you have been in commerce for a long and healthy career,
Yep.
and I would love to spend a little bit of time learning a little bit more about your background and what inspires you and what's driven you professionally and how you ended up at Parks Project.
It's kind of a winding road. I actually started my career within consulting, and actually was CRM consulting, which in 2000 is completely different than what it is now. But my desire was always to work within the kind of content commerce community space. And that led me to go work in the entertainment industry. So I worked at Warner Brothers, which was the WB network at the time. So I actually worked in comedy development, working with writers and producers to bring shows to networks such as Jamie Foxx show or Reba, Steve Harvey, some of those other, television series like that. And then from there, I've always been an athlete. I've always been enamored with sneakers in particular. And I met someone at an event probably similar to this, that worked at Nike. And was in the entertainment marketing division. And within the early 2000s, product placement really wasn't a thing. That was starting to become a little bit more known and developed as a marketing tactic. And because I had a desire for sneakers and a desire to get free stuff, kind of like any young person, I just leveraged the fact that I worked at a television network and I had so much access to writers and directors and actors. And the WB network was the kind of preeminent network for young talent. So at that time, you had Dawson's Creek and some of the other TV shows like that. So I just started to connect, the lady at Nike with all of our actors and costume designers and started to get placement within these television shows. And then that ended up kind of winding road to Adidas. So I actually started my career, 13-year career at Adidas, working in global basketball as an assistant product line manager. That's a job that probably most people know what it is. I think in the digital space, product line managers are a digital product, but in the commerce kind of sporting world, it's actually working on footwear or apparel or accessories. So I had the honor of turning storytelling, turning performance into a lifestyle, into product that could, equip our athletes or our, everyday consumers into big advocates and perform at their best. So, my job was really to manage the process between working with athletes, working with our marketing teams in development to actually build products. So very lucky for me when I joined, I had no clue what that role really entailed, but that naivete actually worked to my benefit because I was so inquisitive about what that took. And I developed shoes for a lot of signature athletes. So probably the most famous one at that time when I started was Tracy McGrady and Kevin Garnett. And that kind of evolved into a career where I worked very intimately within the basketball industry, primarily with our professional athletes and universities. And then about 13 years in, after I became the head of U.S. basketball, I wanted to kind of move away from product and actually work on the go-to-market side and lead that industry within the U.S. And basketball is one of those places that it really transitions from court to street. And I think that's been something that has really resonated with me growing up in Los Angeles, basketball in the 80s with Showtime and how good UCLA was at the time. There was always some swag and lifestyle associated with that. So that idea of mixing court, street, performance, and lifestyle to me was something that was so exciting that wherever I went after Adidas, I wanted to play in that space. So leaving Adidas, I was actually lucky enough to work with a family office for LeBron James, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jimmy Iovine called Main Street Advisors. And Paul Wachter's kind of a god in the family office space and has really stewarded the careers of a lot of professionals. and we wanted to start a supplement company. So at that time, direct to consumer subscription was really hot. You had the Dollar Shave Clubs of the world. And our thesis was there was no magic pill. And this idea that supplementation, empowering consumers with the content and community and access to professionals such as Arnold Schwarzenegger or LeBron James, Cindy Crawford, Lindsey Vonn was really a value add. So we looked at ourselves not just as a supplement company, but really as a community. So I was able to be employee number one and work with some really amazing people to build that company out. And then I would say through that journey, I eventually led to Parks Project, where I've been there about a year and a half as their first president. Parks Project is a brand that's been around 10 years. We're an outdoor lifestyle brand that supports parks. And what that means is our name is pretty simple. It's parks, funding projects with product. So we are a B Corp. We are a for-profit company. But the reason for that is our founders were employees at Tom's early on. And they found that local parks or national parks in particular were kind of misunderstood about how they're being maintained. And what they learned was kind of like all brands, there's a fundamental problem you want to solve. And they learned that at that time, the majority of trails were maintained by volunteer organizations. So Keith, our founder CEO, was on a hike with his daughter, his newly born daughter, and the trail was closed. And he was like, well, there's a new visitor center. Things look really new, but why is this trail overgrown? And that kind of put him on a course around conservation and really trail maintenance. And because he was at Tom's at the time, he understood how profit, purpose, and product could really all come together to affect change. And in particular, national parks are really like athletes. They're legendary. They're larger than life. They invite people, but at the same time, they're also actually kind of exclusive, not as easy to get to, not as easy to access as you would think. And in particular, because they are such icons, people like to wear that product. And when he went to the visitor centers or the local towns and saw the product, it just didn't have any style. And it didn't really kind of resonate with how impactful these places were. So he decided that they could attack it with great design. And really fun projects, with great product and really kind of galvanize this idea of content, community, and commerce together. And 10 years later, we're an 8-figure company. We sell all our products anywhere from REI to Urban Outfitters, Madewell, Backcountry. So we kind of span this consumer landscape from like traditional outdoor people to park enthusiasts or just kind of everyday consumers. And we have just kind of crossed the threshold in terms of projects that we funded, and we've given over $2.7 million back to funding projects. So it's a great journey, and we're having our 10th anniversary in February.
Cheers.
Yeah.
That's an incredible journey and so much to dig into. You've got this great alliteration in your ethos. We've talked a little bit about product, purpose, profit. We'll come back to that. You talked about content, community, and commerce.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you think about that and how you're applying that at Parks US?
I think that you have to, probably the one that's missing is consumer. I think that's one of the things that I've learned over my career is to actually respect the consumer and think about what role you play in their lives. There are so many different elements of competition. I think when you're in a brand, you tend to just think, I do this. Let's just say I'm Parks Project and I got Code Epoxy or Patagonia, and that's my competitor. The reality is the competitor is day-to-day life. It's time, it's your children, it's television, it's media, it's everything. Anything that distracts you from focusing on the quote unquote funnel. So understanding where you fit into that consumer's life, how you potentially go into the intersection of values and I would say interests is something that you have to think about. So specifically for Parks Project, we have over 800,000 Instagram followers, and we definitely punch above our weight. And this idea of our community, there is a huge community of quote unquote park enthusiasts, not just people that love national parks, but people that love nature, love wild places, love their local parks as well. And we've really understood that community needs to be spoken to differently. Other brands may kind of take an approach that's very top down. The world is very overwhelming. There's this existential threat. You need to help us because we are the vehicle to affect change versus us where we're very much a grassroots approach. We kind of go bottoms up and say, hey, there is a threat. There are challenges. We want to make you aware of those, but simply taking one step outside, taking one, potential class, one event that you can volunteer at, just simply doing something is a huge impact. And our kind of mantra is leave it better than you found it. And this idea of better, we want people to do something better. We don't need them to do the best, right? And I think if everyone is doing their part to leave it better, it's going to have an exponential impact. So in terms of our community, there's several different ways that you can engage them. And I think what we found is simply approaching it from a commerce perspective and product is not enough. It really isn't enough with the type of consumer we have. A t-shirt's a t-shirt. There's a difference between a t-shirt that says Yosemite that you could get at a place like Target that you can get for $15, and then a t-shirt you can get from us with Yosemite on it with great design that costs $38. Like, we're able to sell that because there is a value association that you want to be a part of this larger thing. And I would say that that's something that I did learn at Adidas as well, is I do think that product can be that vessel for expression and something that, the minute that you get that product for whatever reason, you make it your own. And I think that has really been a key for us, is to be consumer centric and really understand what this community wants and how we can approach them. And the content strategy has really been an important one for us. I think there are kind of three elements. One, an appreciation of beautiful places. So that comes from beautiful imagery, really telling the stories behind the parks. So that's one element. The second one is really highlighting the problems that exist and making people aware of the advocacy portion. A lot of that is done in conjunction with our nonprofit partners. And then the third side of it is really, celebrating the product that is inspired by these places. And I think when you start to talk about, again, this idea of products, the existential problem, and then really just kind of starting to find elements that connect, it becomes very powerful for us.
The 4 Cs, as we apply them all to bringing a new product to life. You talked in your background about some of the early days at Adidas, and a shoe is more than a shoe. Like, how do you plan that? How do you design that? How are you thinking holistically about honoring all 4 dimensions throughout the concept, throughout the design, throughout production, the go-to-market? Just how does it weave all together?
A lot of times it doesn't, right? You have that intent, and I kind of joked, like, not everyone can take a concept and see it all the way through creation to ultimately your customer, your retailer, and then your consumer, and then ultimately, kind of this place in the overall community. It's really hard. So I think first and foremost, understanding what you're trying to solve. I think everything comes from solving a problem, whether you think it's a quote unquote problem or an opportunity. You have to keep that why, right? And that why needs to be a constant reminder with every single step of the process. I do think it's important to have that singular focus on the consumer or what you're trying to solve for, and having a steward. A lot of brands, when you're working on product, the product line manager is that kind of reminder of like, hey, this is why we're doing it. If we want to, sell to this type of consumer, it's got to be at this retailer, which needs to be this price. If it's going to solve for this, it needs to be able to be comfortable. And, I think sometimes you get into this place where you have only one impression of how to solve the problem. And then through the design or even development process, you start to kind of understand that that can weave and look different, and be okay with that. But it still has to have the same end result. There are very few people that can take a concept, and very few concepts that can be so consistent until the very end. I mean, there's enough examples of the world of pivots, right? We thought we were going to be this, and we ended up having to pivot and it'd be a different product company or a different approach or a different consumer, but the problem inherently was the same. But I do think understanding your why and staying pretty crystal clear on that, but then also having the discipline to be okay to say no with things, having that, ability, at least at parks. I try to always tell the team, like, we are too small not to fail. We understand what we're trying to accomplish, but like an Adidas are so big, the stakes are so high, the timelines are so long, you can't fail. There's so much investment in that. And for a brand like ours, we're small, we're scrappy. We're essentially 12 people and all of us are playing multiple different roles. Like, we have to fail. We have to try things because that's the only way we're going to move from any incrementality to, an exponential growth, is trying something, pretty wild, out of the box and new. And I think that's kind of almost our why. Our why is to leave it better than you found it, which means that we have to evolve with the consumer. We have to evolve with the times. We have to try things. And I think 10 years in, we've been given, luckily, the respect and honestly the authenticity to try things. And I think that elasticity has been really important in our success.
As you think about the consumer at the center, like I can hear as we've chatted how much on your mind the customer is.
Mhm.
You mentioned that toward the tail end of your tenure at Adidas, you were excited to take on more responsibility for the go-to-market
Right.
aspect. Like, as you think about guiding the team today as the president, sitting on top of the brand
Yeah.
and really guiding the organization as a whole, how does that play out? What is your message to the team? How are you placing the customer at the center? And I'm also curious to know how the customer experience, the way that we shop, the way that we
Mhm.
engage, the technologies that we use, the places that we might shop, whether retail, digital, or otherwise, fit into that.
It's a great question. And I think there's probably multiple different ways that I can attack that. I think first and foremost, being focused on demographics versus psychographics, I think is an important distinction. I think in the overall industry, people are starting to understand that the quote unquote profiles of 18 to 34, this disposable income, living in this cities and everything isn't enough. You've seen that with COVID, the digital nomads, like the identities of people have completely changed. So I think for us, it actually played really well with our why, our purpose, right? We wanted people, again, with this idea of their values and their interests to intersect. That kind of has been the way that I've really, kind of challenged the team to say, okay, what are our values? What do we feel those values can look like in the world? And how can they connect with consumers in a multitude of different ways, depending on where they're at, depending on the time that we have in the world? One of the benefits, that I really try to instill in the team is the e-commerce and marketing team are at the forefront. They have the most flexibility, and the product teams and operations teams don't, where that's very much a very static system. Most product timelines are anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So you're making a lot of calculated bets. And for us, we again try to look at the why, try to look at the behaviors of the consumers and kind of what those things are that fundamentally aren't going to change. Our consumers want to leave it better, right? So the social purpose angle is a differentiator. So understanding that there's kind of a baseline of the product has to be great. It has to support parks. There needs to be some sort of angle that is really addressing the why that we exist. That stays pretty consistent, but we utilize our marketing and e-commerce teams as the, quote unquote tip of the spear to basically steward that in a different way. So it sometimes kind of runs into conflict of what we just discussed, right? About, hey, staying consistent and focused from the very concept all the way to customer and ultimately consumer. But I very much challenge the team to say, what's the why? What's going on in the world? What are consumer behaviors looking like? Not being people that say, well, that's not what we've done, or we did that in the past. We can't do that. I get very frustrated in this idea of like, yeah, we tried that and it didn't work, or we attempted that and that's not us. So I try to constantly, remind everyone that no one is the same today that they were yesterday. You're imprinted on so many different levels with the consumer behavior and all the different facets of what that entails. We have to understand that, your values may not change, but your interests might. The way that we need to talk to you might as well. So I really look at reminding people of the values, understanding interests can change, really making sure that the why is clear, but then also giving the grace and the challenge to the people that are so immediately tied to the consumer and have so much power to be flexible and adjust, giving them the push to say, okay, let's try this, and this. Like maybe this didn't work in the past because consumers weren't ready. Maybe the medium in which we were communicating wasn't ready. Maybe timing plays a huge factor in how we can attack this.
How do you think about the problem that your consumers are solving? I would imagine that there's a draw to the cause
Mhm.
and a shared purpose and desire to leave it better than they found it.
Right.
What else?
I think one of the big challenges is people aren't aware. Like honestly, people aren't aware that certain problems exist, right? They hear kind of the larger climate change. They hear, that global warming exists, that there's a pollution problem. They know these larger things, but breaking it down into a place that directly impacts their lives is very challenging, right? They just don't they hear that, they wanna be a part of it, but then they don't understand how that impacts them, how they can get involved. So I think for us, again, I kinda say we're like a gateway, a Trojan horse. I always try to joke with people and say we're kind of like the gateway, right? We really look at ourselves as saying, "Hey, you may not be aware of, this, but do you know that that trail that you were hiking, the other day in the Santa Monica Mountains isn't going to be there tomorrow because no one went out there and was raking it or removing mustard green." So there's like these things that like we just don't think about, and you're like, well, I always go to this place and it always is kind of there. And then you're like, well, there are people behind that that are ensuring that those things are there for the next generation or for you the next week or the week after. So I think, again, it's this idea of like breaking things down and making them relative to those types of consumers. We have two target consumers we call Wit and Cam. And, that has been a development that we've done a lot of work on to really kind of understand not just the demographics, but the psychographics. And for them, they want to get involved, but they have no clue. So in a lot of respects, the way that they get involved is aligning themselves with brands that supposedly are taking care of the world, right? And in some cases, it's like, well, my values are all about holistic medicine or reducing my impact. So I'm going to go buy toilet paper from Who Gives a Crap, or I'm going to go shop at Erewhon, or I'm going to go organic versus not, or, local markets versus kind of big chains. And I think we try to take that kind of idea of like localization, of people that want to get involved but have no clue or want to celebrate a place they may never go to, but they want to be associated with it. I think we try to attack it that way.
How do you gather the intel psychographically? Like what are the inputs that you're
Yeah.
using to become more intelligent there?
I think there's a few things. One, the people that work at our brand honestly live and breathe the ethos. I think we're really lucky in that way that there's a certain type of person that gravitates towards a social enterprise. We don't have the same perks as a Google, right? We're not paying, crazy salaries, but we're also not a nonprofit. A lot of the people that are at the brand started as fans of the brand or fans of national parks. So I think there's like a certain type of person internally that really lives and breathes that, which I think is amazing. So we kind of have an internal compass there. Secondly, we moved this year into a new realm, which was this idea of an experiential and retail space. So we opened up what is kind of our office retail experiential space in Culver City called the Discovery Center. So for us, we're running 2 or 3 events a week with organizations, with local artists. We have our retail store. So we're constantly engaging with our consumers at the retail front, engaging with the, nonprofit partners that we can work with. For example, we work with an organization called Trace Club that does a lot of work locally, but we also work with people like Friends of Bologna Creek or the Sierra Club. So those nonprofit partners that have a broad audience and are really kind of authenticators of the brand we work with as well. So we're gathering intel about what's going on in the quote unquote industry. We're engaging with consumers in real life by throwing these events, by also having the retail space. And then I would say digitally, like most brands, we're doing the consumer focus groups every single month. Morgan on our team, who leads the CX team, she's constantly engaging with consumers and inviting them to focus groups. And we never do the same type of focus group, and we never have the same type of consumer. Sometimes it may be like, hey, this is someone that's a repeat purchaser, or this is someone that bought into higher price point product, or was a big fan of when we do a collaboration like peanuts. So we try to like do a little bit of kind of the bricks and clicks strategy to really understand that someone going into a store or attending an event or potentially seeing an ad and purchasing, they're all going to have different intents or different entry points into the brand, and really understanding that we can kind of triangulate that. And then I would just say one other element for us is we're really lucky that we work with some amazing retailers who are constantly kind of at the forefront of consumer behavior and intel, and in particular REI and Urban Group. So Urban Outfitters, they have Free People Movement, Anthropology. So they kind of harness this idea of youth consumer up to 34 and above. REI really speaks to the outdoor enthusiasts. They're a co-op, so they're kind of at the forefront of advocacy. So we're able to lean on those partners as well. So I'd say that's a little bit of a cheat code. It may not be applicable to, maybe all of the audience that we're speaking to here, but I do think the message there is partnerships, right? And a partnership may be a specific organization or person, but it could also be a vehicle, right? Such as an event, such as a retail store or a pop-up or something like we're doing here today.
I think that's great. We found a fourth P as well. And I actually wanted to close on this. We were talking a little ahead of the segment about all the great collabs that
Right.
you guys do, and just like the unique nature of a B Corp and the need to focus on purpose, but also product and
Right.
profit. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that works successfully and how you've maintained your identity
Right.
through it all?
Yeah, I would say that it's a challenge, to be honest. I think partnerships or collabs have, in some respects, become table stakes for a lot of brands. It also has kind of become a buzzword, right? Whether it's a partnership with an influencer or a brand or, content creator. I think there's kind of a few elements in terms of what you should look for in a partnership, and then what I believe is success in that, and then maybe some pitfalls. First and foremost, the value alignment. Like that has to really be there, because the minute that you're not authentic, that really erodes all of the things that you've built over a period of time. And I would say that a lot of people are very quick to judge, and a lot of people are very quick to say, oh, that's not it. So I think check authenticity, right? Like they've got to do that. The partner has to be in it. Like it has to be their thing. And I've worked with a lot of partners in the past, whether they're individuals or brands, and they're not engaged. It's like, hey, you guys do all the work and we'll give you our name and et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't scaffold into anything new or into something that is sustainable. And I think that becomes a wasted opportunity. So I think everyone has to kind of understand the evaluation of those partnerships to say, are these people going to be engaged? Is it going to lead to something else? That's also a pitfall, right? Is you partner with someone and you may not have the visibility into who they're partnering with, where they're at, what's going on behind the scenes with their company and investment. So you tend to almost be guilty by association as well. And that's something that, I would say that anyone's going to partner with an individual or a brand, they kind of have to have a good understanding of where that partner sits, because we've seen it where, there's been partners that we've worked with that become problematic, or maybe we're problematic and we didn't do the due diligence, or something came up that we didn't evaluate. So I think that could be, a pitfall as well, but they can really accelerate certain areas of your brand. So there's some partners that we work with that will strategically say, hey, for us, women's is a huge priority as we evaluate the brand. Our core consumer, actually on our .com, are women. Our wholesale consumer, it tends to be a little bit more balanced. But if we want to address the women's business, we were purely unisex, and now we're unisex plus some women specific styles. We've started to say, okay, if that's a priority for us, where in that landscape do we want to play? Who are the partners that are going to allow us to get to certain retailers or reach certain consumers or potentially validate a certain style? Because that's the scaffolding, right? Is okay, let's partner with these people. And whether we do another follow up with them or not, it's going to maybe lead to another partnership, or it's going to get us into a place and kind of be this flywheel. And I think that has to be an evaluation. I think at some point in time, it can become very saturated and you lose your identity. That honestly has been one of our challenges. Is sometimes the partnerships are a gift and a curse. Sometimes they're too successful. And then the percent of your business that is driven by these quote unquote energy moments or partners kind of overshadows the everyday business that you're trying to drive. And that becomes somewhat of a drug. And for us, we do face that. We've worked with some amazing partners. We actually are launching a partnership with Dr. Seuss today. The Places You'll Go. We're actually the first brand ever to be able to bring the real world into the Seussian world. So we're bringing Mount Rainier to all the Places You'll Go. And that's great. We also just launched an inline collection, and this has the opportunity to overshadow that, right? And then you go into Black Friday. So I think also timing and understanding where you can have a heartbeat approach to say, hey, we've launched something new. It's going to kind of have a natural progression down. Let's get an energy moment to kind of get things going and then hit them with something else. But I think you have to kind of think through where you want this to go, the potential impact. But I think for us, as we go forward, we're looking at it as saying, we don't want to rely on it, but we also don't want to ignore it. It is a pillar of our business that we will say there is this silo of the business. It does what it does, but it really kind of sets a little bit more pressure on the rest of the business to really grow and not let this be the thing to grow. And the way that we do that, again, is continuing to challenge ourselves to engage that community that we have. The community that we have, we did not build through a collaboration. It's not. Like, the collaborations are great, and we've actually seen that a lot of the collaborations are kind of outward consumers. My head of ecom, Tyler, who's amazing, he loves the collabs because it's very easy on the targeting side. It's like, I am going to go after Dr. Seuss consumers, and I'm going to go on these channels, and I'm going to go this, and this, and it's a very clear path to purchase. It's a lot harder to get after someone that is going to buy a Mystic Mountains collection inspired by Alaska. That's a lot harder. But I think rather than fighting it, I think we say, hey, let's be disciplined. They got to lead to something else. How do they fit into potentially the main things we're doing? And then I would say, lastly, we are always challenging ourselves on the partnership front to fund a project. So when we do some partnerships, for example, we worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and we worked directly with the band, and we gave a donation to an organization called Nature Bridge that does youth advocacy and education in parks. And in particular, the collection was inspired by Yosemite. So we use that partnership to fund scholarships. We have other partnerships where we're giving money, they're giving money, we're doing an event. We worked with Merrill. We went and did a cleanup, around Bologna Creek and kind of the LA City parks. They're giving their power. We're taking our power. We're bringing advocacy and impact together. So I think that's like the other thing is, like, they're not like stealing the credibility without actually contributing, and kind of looking at those ways as like 1 + 1 = 2.
Do you have time for one
Yeah,
final
yeah.
question? Any peek behind the curtain into 2025? I don't want to steal any thunder, but is there anything that the team and you are working on that's on the horizon that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I would say there's 3 things. One, we did debut an AI bot on our site this year. Got some mixed reaction from our core consumers, and something that we are going to kind of retool and relaunch in the new year, which has been great. We learned a lot about that, and kind of figured out that sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's really the way that you house it, especially for an organization like ours that is a social purpose one. Sometimes you look at things through a different lens, and understanding that maybe the way that your mechanism is communicated probably should be pivoted in a little bit of a different way. So I'm really excited about that. It's really about giving people tools to engage with parks and national parks in a efficient and less impactful way, because a lot of people just don't know. We are partnering with the Red Hot Chili Peppers again, and this is a full collection. We're very excited because the band has finished touring, and now they're more engaged than ever. So it's a really exciting collection that we are working on. We do have a partnership with a a very large retailer for Earth Month that I'm really excited about. But what I think I'm probably the most excited about is it's our 10-year anniversary. We're going to do our first brand campaign to really kind of kickstart what the next 10 years looks like. And, my partner and founders and myself, we have the ambition to activate 1 million consumers. That really is over the next 10 years. We've given $2.7 million back, but that's been to projects and organizations and cleanups. But for us now, the next 10 years is really going on the grassroots level and activating 1 million consumers. So I think that's what I'm the most excited about because it's a completely different approach to impact.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again, Jack Gray, president at Parks Project US. And thanks again to our host, retention.com. Jack, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
It's been such a pleasure.
Appreciate it.